All right. Um, I hope my sound voice is also audible. So, very good evening and welcome everyone. So, let's continue our discussions which we left midway last time. On Prime Minister Shastri ji's approval, our army got reinvigorated. Right when a prime minister says, go ahead and capture something, I am behind you." So that means a lot. So Indian army got reinvigorated and opened a parallel front in the Punjab sector. The war zone shifted from the northern borders, which was let me quickly use a laser pointer. Yeah, so earlier the war zone was somewhere here, right, where Pakistani troops were trying to capture Akhnur and chop off Jammu and Kashmir. But then with this whole parallel operation, the war zone shifted from north to south. Now, what happened was, just to give you an idea, this the about the territory, so that you can appreciate the information in the upcoming slide. This is Amritsar on the Indian side, and this is Lahore on the Pakistani side, and this is Sialkot. So these three will be the key areas of operation. And Indian Army decided to open two parallel fronts in the Lahore and the Sialkot sector, right? So Indian Army's 11 Corps was supposed to launch an attack in the name of Operation Riddle with an aim to march towards Lahore and put some pressure on Pakistani army movement in the northern sector, right? And then Indian One Corps, Army's One Corps, was supposed to march towards Sialkot sector under the name of Operation Nepal with the same objective, right? So we opened two fronts. We were supposed to open two fronts at the same time. And then, as planned, on September 6th. So this timeline is very important. So on September 6th, on 1st of September, they launched this whole Operation Grand Slam, and on September 6th, we retaliated with these two parallel fronts. Uh, but we were able to launch 60,000 strong Indian Army 11 Corps launched an attack in the Punjab region of Pakistan. The three infantry division were tasked to capture Ichogil Canal. If you see from the geographical area, this is the Ichogil Canal. Now, Ichogil Canal today is known as Bambawali Ravi Bedin Canal. It is a formidable defense to Pakistan. So you can see here, right? Um, Geographically, it's a natural barrier to any enemy advances. If you have seen any palaces or king's palaces, they create a trench, right? They create a trench and canal surrounding the palace, so that it it creates hindrance, natural hindrance to any enemy advance, and this was a natural formidable defense. So at that time, Ichogil Canal was 120 feet wide, 30 feet deep, with around 20 feet of water. And to capture Lahore, this canal was supposed to be breached. So Indian Army's 15th Infantry Division was tasked to advance on the Amritsar Lahore Grand Trunk Road. So this is Amritsar Lahore Road, right? So this is the road. And then 15th Army Division was supposed to advance here, and then 7th Infantry Division was supposed to advance in the south of the Lahore to capture Barki and then lead on to Ichogil Canal. And then the last 44th Mountain Division was supposed to advance in this sector, which is the Kasur and Ichogil Canal sector. Now, Indian offensives did achieved complete surprise, and we made very good progress initially along this whole Grand Trunk Road, the first one. But our offensives, the initial successes was not exploited properly around, and about by day one, we already lost our momentum, and there was a number of setbacks. Ichogil Canal was reached at few points, but there was no proper crossing, so there was no support. And Fourth Infantry Division attack was pushed back by Pakistani One Armored Division. So we kind of was we could not fully consolidate our plans. Now once India, this is an important thing to note, once India opened its front in the Punjab sector, Pakistani started using their air force. They did preemptive strikes on our 4 key air bases, Pathankot, Halwara, and Adampur and Amritsar, right? So meanwhile, so 6th September we launched this Operation Riddle on the Lahore sector, and in the midnight of 7th 8th September, Indian Army 1 Corps, as I told you earlier, of around some 18,000 men, launched its major offensive in the Sialkot sector. Now we couldn't open both fronts on the same day due to some logistical problems, right? Had we done that, it would have been a completely different situation. It could have impacted more. Uh, for Pakistan, it could have been a more grievous situation to tackle. But anyways, after a couple of days, we launched this operation, and the objective was to cut off Sialkot from the southern side, right? Uh, and to capture, to cut off from the southern side, and to capture, make a boundary of Indian armed forces around the Sialkot sector. So around 215 tanks of one armored division spearheaded the attack, and they were accompanied by 3 divisions, one mountain and two infantry divisions. So we made good moves here. We made good moves and secured the border areas in the initial days, causing heavy damage to Pakistani armor, and we kept on continuously moving inside the Pakistani territory. Now, Pakistani troops were advancing towards Amritsar, because on the southern side, on the Lahore sector, Pakistani troops were advancing towards Amritsar, and it was the Battle of Asal Uttar where things actually turned side, and Pakistani army was completely taken aback by the trap that Indian army laid for them. So it was one of its kind, and it is still. In the military records, it is still one of the most intelligent battle, I would say, that was fought here. So this was the largest tank battle that has ever been fought in the world history, and Indian army only had a handful of infantrymen and a single Indian cavalry regiment armed with vintage Centurion tanks of World War II fame. I told you earlier, right? And this was confronted by the heavily armed Pakistani invading force, consisting of one armored division and 11th infantry division. So when I say armored division, as the name suggests, it consists of tanks and artillery forces, and we didn't had that to respond back, right? So Pakistani force was marching with heavy military, artillery, and tank force towards Amritsar via this Khemkaran sector. So from here, Pakistani army was marching. Now, as we discussed before, due to our intelligence mix-up, our armored division was deployed in the Sialkot sector. Remember, we opened 2 sectors in Lahore and Sialkot, and our armored division was deployed in the Sialkot sector, which is a bit up towards the north. We did not have enough powerful tanks available to counter this Pakistani movement. And considering the situation that we don't have any proper ammunition and artillery to fight back, the GOC 4th Mountain Division Major General Gurbakh Singh immediately ordered the division to fall back and make a horseshoe-shaped division, defensive position with Asal Uttar as its focal point. So this was Asal Uttar as a focal point, and they made this horseshoe kind of a formation. Now, in addition to that, in the night, Indian troops, along with the local villagers, they flooded the entire area. It was a sugarcane field, and they flooded the entire area with the local canals. And the next morning, when Pakistani tanks of one armored division moved into this territory, mainly Patton tanks, they were lured into this horseshoe trap. The ground was swampy. It slowed down the advance of the Pakistani tanks, and most of them could not even move because of the slush. So around 100, you can imagine, around 100 Pakistani tanks, mostly Pattons and few Sherman Shaffers, were destroyed, and another 40 plus were captured. And we only lost only 10 tanks during that counter-offensive. So they started running away, abandoning their tanks and all. So they started running away from the tanks. And this whole battle strategy was the brainchild of Brigadier Thomas K. Theograj. You can see in this inset. I'll remove my image. So this is Thomas K. Theograj. And then it is said that Indian Army Chief it is said that Indian Army Chief General Chaudhary wanted these troops to leave Asaluttar and defend another post, given the odds that they were facing. But at that time, Lieutenant General Harbakh Singh, who was the General Officer Command of Western Command, uh, who is here, he disobeyed the Indian Army Chief and took on a superior Pakistani armored. It was because of his gut feel and uh, he knew the enemy and the terrain so well, and so yeah, the whole operation came out to be one of its kind, and Indian Centurion tanks outgunned the more modern Pakistani pattern tanks in that battle, and it really proved to be the turning point of 1965 war. Now, the story of Asal Uttar will be incomplete without the mention of company quartermaster Havaldar Abdul Hamid. You might have known, you must have known his name, heard his name. So Abdul Hamid led the vehicle-mounted recoilless rifle. He just had a recoilless rifle detachment, and he the battalion, his battalion, came under immense crossfire from both on the ground and by the air, as the Pakistani jets were causing havoc on 8th, 9th, and 10th September. And Abdul Hamid alone destroyed around 7 tanks just by his recoilless gun on an open jeep by continuously maneuvering and fooling enemy. It was one of its kind achievements. But on September 10th, his jeep came under the crossfire of one of the tanks, and he died immediately. But by then, we have caused immense damage to the enemy, and the morale of the battalion was very high. Our morale was very high, and enemy was running away like headless chickens. So Abdul Hamid was awarded Paramveer Chakra posthumously. The battalion suppressed further attacks by the Pakistanis, and this battle was a decisive Indian victory. So you can, just to give you an image, so this was the graveyard of tank in the Saluttar, and you can see in the inset here, this is the recoilless gun that Abdul Hamid used. Just to give you a perspective, at the most, recoilless gun in a fire can destroy just one tank at a time, just one tank, because by that time it get noticed and destroyed by the enemy, because it is so difficult to maneuver this gun. 2 tanks if you destroy with this gun, it's a bonus, and 3 is an excellent effort, right? But Abdul Hamid destroyed 7 tanks. Now you can imagine, that's why he got Paramveer Chakra, right? This is a famous picture that I was talking about. But anyways, uh, it is mentioned that US, because of this incident, US actually had to set up an inquiry about the performance of Patton tanks after this bloodshed of their equipment. And in some accounts, it is also mentioned that the Patton tanks were run off. They said that Patton tanks were run on petrol, so that they were highly inflammable, and Pakistani soldiers were frightened by dying of fire. So they later switched to diesel. But as per me, there was nothing wrong with these machines. Just it was not being handled by the right men. So the Battle of Asaluttar led to the creation of Patan Nagar. Today it is known as Patan Nagar. And you can see the image. So according to military historian, Pakistan admitted that it lost 165 tanks during the 1965 war, and more than half of which were knocked out during this debacle. Okay. So by September 11, the feat of the Abdul Hamid and the turn of events at Asal Uttar raised the morale of the Indian army, and it was now time for India to put the final nail in the coffin. And we were marching towards further inside the Pakistani territory in the Sialkot, and we captured around many small villages like Filora, Chavinda, Botur, Dograndi, Wazirwali, all in this area. And by 6th, this was led by Indian 1st Armored Division, and they commenced the attack on Filora at first on 10 September from an unexpected direction, and it was well coordinated attack between armored armored and infantry and artillery. So by the 6th day of battle, 17 Pune Horse along with 4 Hudson Horse Regiment of India succeeded in destroying around 60 enemy tanks while suffering only 9 tank casualties. So despite of an inferior tank that we had, and Colonel Tarapur, as you can see in the image, due to his inspiring leadership, has tilted the balance completely in India's favor. So on one side, we fought the Battle of Asaluttar in the south, and here on the north side, not exactly north, but in the Sialkot sector, we were showing some good results because our armored division, as I told, we had only one armored division at that time, and that was deployed in the Sialkot sector. So we did some excellent progress here. Now comes the interesting bit. While this war was going on, now let me try and give you an insight into the relationship of various countries and influencers in the United Nations that led to the ceasefire of 1965 war. So after 1962 war, our relationship with China wasn't tatters, right? So uh, there was a significant threat on our eastern and northern border sharing with China, and heavy armed deployments were there. On the other side, Pakistan had built a strong relationship with China and got assurances from China during the war to that China will engage and pressurize India to see to Pakistan's demand. Now, during the middle of 60s, the Western powers like US and UK. So here I have merged the flag of US and UK because I am talking both in the same term. I'm not talking specifically. So I've just tried to merge the flag here. So this is a US and UK flag together. So yeah, so the US and UK Western powers considered China and Soviet Union as their enemy number one, and made every effort to contain the spread of communism in the world. And they formed organizations like CETO, CENTO, and they were brought into existence to curb the spread of communism in the world. So so being, and on the Indian side, being a non-allied member, India was not in the US favor list as well, right? And on the contrary, Pakistan had good relationships with US and received a lot of aids, military aid, as I told you before, and was also engaged in a military assistance program. However, later, because Pakistan got tilted towards China, it caused embarrassment to US and UK, and they were not very happy with Pakistan's behavior. Now, on the Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union was developing both economic and political relationship with India, and being a non-allied country, the differences with China were mounting, and obviously Soviet Union didn't wanted China's influence to rise in the region, as it wanted to be the supreme power. So this was a this is a kind of a mesh that I have created to give you a view of how each country were related, and how the relationships were there between various countries, to set the stage for the next set of slides. Now, with international geopolitics in the backdrop, let's take a pause and see the intense negotiations that were happening in the United Nations. So a lot happened before, but I'll put my focus on the month of September 1965, where most of the actions took place. By the way, try to be with me in this roller coaster journey, as there will be lots of dates and events which I've tried to condense in a slide. So I'll try to go slow, but feel free to chime in and stop me and try to relish this information. So yeah, so this whole everything, this war, the actual Grand Slam is happening on September 1st, from September 1st, and on September 6th, India opened the parallel front, just to reiterate so that you get that context. So on September 1st, the United Nations Secretary General U Thant, you can see in the inset here picture, issued a cable to both India and Pakistan to resolve the situation amicably. Now, before even receiving a reply from President Ayub Khan or Prime Minister Shastri, Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, on September 3rd, United Nations Secretary General circulated a report. Now, this report was based on the observations made by Lieutenant General R.H. Nimmo. Now, Lieutenant General Nimmo was the chief of the United Nations Military Observer Group. In the short form, you call it as UNMOG in India and Pakistan. And this report was issued to inform the member nations of United Nations about the grave situation that was developing in the region, and it was told that UN has already reached out to India and Pakistan to start discussing about ceasefire. Uh, they have also received verbal assurances from India about the same, but from Pakistan, nothing came, nothing positive came. So on September 3rd, he issued this report. Now, based on this report, on September 4th, United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution. So now the resolution is kind of a formal thing which countries had to abide by. So they adopted a resolution to call for an immediate ceasefire between Kashmir in the Kashmir and requested U Thant, Secretary General, to report what is happening in next 3 days. Now it was addressed to both India and Pakistan. Now, on the same day, September 4th, Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri ji responded on this on the first cable that they issued, because it is happening in such a quick succession that they need time to respond back, right? So, Shastri ji just stated that how it all began and how India has to defend its territory from such aggression. He demanded Pakistan to provide credible reassurances to stop this fiasco, to arrive to any ceasefire agreement, right? But on the contrary, on September 5th, Ayub Khan, who was the Pakistan president at that time, provided a lengthy conversational letter putting all the blame on India for unprecedented act of violence by India in Jammu and Kashmir along the ceasefire line. It brought local unrest, local uprising, denial of right, plebiscite. They need to do plebiscite, etc., etc., etc. So the Ayub Khan's peace plan was the withdrawal of Indian armed forces from the entire J&K region and conduct a plebiscite under UN observations. Now, by this time, by the time United Nations Secretary General received a reply to his cable, the situation, you can see the dates, right? The situation on that region was already getting tense. Pakistani troops were marching towards Akhnur, and India, in order to defend its territory, had to open another front in the Punjab on 6 September. Now, when United Nations did not receive any response from either India or Pakistan on its 4th September resolution, so they had held an united emergency meeting and asked U Thant to personally visit India and Pakistan. And then U Thant reached Rawalpindi on September 9th. But I mean, as you can imagine, nothing useful came out during his Pakistan visit, because Pakistan never gave any concrete reassurances, because he was basking in the glory that he's in a very good position, great position, and he'll be able to succeed in his devious plans. And then after getting nothing from Pakistan, U Thant reached Delhi. On reaching Delhi, Shastri ji held his position. He said that J&K is an integral part of India, right? And there can be no military solution. So if you can assure me that Pakistan is getting ready to get away from the territory, call Pakistan as an aggressor, stop their infiltrators, provide some reassurances, so we can think about that. But U Thant didn't had any such reassurances, so he couldn't say anything to Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, so his visit remained inconclusive. So this whole drama was happening in the United Nations. Now, during the whole time of crisis, role of China cannot be ruled out. Since 1962 war, China kept the border situation or the border issue alive with India by sending occasional notes to Indian embassy in China about Indo-China border violations by Indian armed forces, which Indian government always denied as baseless. Obviously, China, we all know that China was sympathetic towards Pakistan, and General Ayub Khan asked China for help. And one such note from China was sent to Indian embassy on September 8th. You can read here, accusing India of China-Sikkim boundary encroachment, and China obviously was sympathizing towards Pakistan. So let's see quickly. On September 8th, China sent that note that I just showed you in my previous slide. And on September 12th, a Ministry of External Affairs of Government of India rejected this Chinese note on September that was issued to India on September 8th, claiming it as baseless. So in response to that, On September 16, China issued another ultimatum to India, reiterated support for Pakistan. So, and on following September 17, India said, okay, you are sending so many notes. So Prime Minister Shastri agreed for a joint inspection on the point that China was claiming that India has encroached. And he said that if any such encroachments are established or found, then India will demolish it without any objection. But at the same time, India sensed that these ultimatums that are coming from China are in collusion with Pakistan and is a risk to its national security. So India immediately launched a diplomatic offensive against this, and informed all international powers and United Nations Security Council about it. And on September 17th itself, India's ambassador in Moscow, TN Kol, met with Soviet Prime Minister, Soviet Union Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin and Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko. They assured, Soviet Union ministers assured to stand, they acknowledged India's position about Kashmir, India's Kashmir policy, and they said that they will completely assist and try to resolve this problem peacefully through UN Security Council. United States and UK also said verbally that they are in favor of getting this resolved quickly. But when Indian ambassador to United States, B.K. Nehru, urged USA to sign it and say it, he refused to do that. Anyways, moving ahead, on September 17th itself, UN Secretary General U Thant issued another report stating that infiltrators from Pakistan were involved in the conflict of the ceasefire line, and Pakistani forces were marching towards Aknur, which was fine. But Indians also have breached the ceasefire line on Kargil, Titwal, and Hajipir Pass, as I showed you, right? And they were marching towards Sialkot and now Lahore. Now India became very fierce. So India fiercely objected to this whole report, stating that India has all the rights to defend its territory, and Pakistan, being an aggressor, should be imposed with appropriate sanctions, as it was not supposed to use the United States provided weapons against India at the first place, because they signed that treaty, right? But but Pakistan was in no mood for any ceasefire at that time, and members of security councils were trying to resolve the conflict in peaceful way. And by 19th of September, you can see Chinese heavy troop deployments were there on India-China border. They were digging trenches near Nathula and Jelepla. They have deployed 15 divisions of troops in Tibet alone, including 2 armored divisions in Tibet. And at least 3 divisions were supported by armored regiments that were deployed around Sikkim region. And besides these land forces, they also had deployed around 300 aircraft, including transport planes in the Tibet region. So imagine, on one hand, India was fighting its war with Pakistan on its western sector, and on the northern and eastern sector, it was being troubled and pressurized by China. And in this same tactics, on September 19th, China issued note reiterating India's aggression, and this time they put a deadline as well, that before midnight of September 22nd of 1965, they need to they need to withdraw its forces, and they extend full support to Pakistan for its just cause. And China was so aggressive that day after day after day, just every day it was issuing notes after notes to India. And on 19 September, it said that India has captured Dungchel territory and it will launch. Chinese started firing along the Indian border of Ladakh and Sikkim and occupy a few checkposts of the Indian side of the border as well. So it was a real tense position on both sides of the borders as far as India is concerned. Anyways, after a long debate, on 20th of September 1965, United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution calling upon India and Pakistan to cease fire on Wednesday, 22nd of September 1965. Then the resolution directed both governments to order ceasefire and withdraw all their troops to the position before August 5th, when the Operation Gibraltar started. Neither India nor Pakistan obviously were happy with the resolution, as it did not fulfill either of the demands. India wanted ceasefire on 2 conditions primarily. That Pakistan should be declared as an aggressor, And second, India's condition was that Pakistan should give assurances that it will not meddle in the Kashmir issue and it will not interfere in future. And Pakistan obviously wanted ceasefire to be linked with plebiscite in Kashmir and was hoping that the help from China, with the help of China that it had so far, he would be able to achieve that. But anyways, India accepted ceasefire without any conditions and conveyed to United Nations Secretary General that if Pakistan also accepts by 21st September, then we can adhere to the timeline proposed by the United Nations, that is of 22nd of September. Now, on the other side, because obviously Pakistani thought that they were at a better position, so they had a massive protest going in the Pakistan against United States, United Nations, India regarding the ceasefire resolution. And amidst all this, Pakistan Foreign Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto ran to New York. He flew to New York to better understand the terms and explore the chance of any negotiations. But with a heavy heart, they agreed to the ceasefire. But Bhutto really threatened to leave United Nations, and he stated in his own words that they will wage a war of 1,000 years if United Nations Security Council failed to resolve Kashmir issue. So it was a threat that it has a recorded threat that he gave to in United Nations Council. But anyways, with the acceptance of Pakistan of ceasefire, it came into effect on 23rd of September. And so-called peace returned to the subcontinent. But a point to note is that Pakistan, though, continued fighting till the last hour of the ceasefire, and in order to grab maximum Indian territory as possible. And within hours of Pakistan assurances around ceasefire on September 22nd, 5 Pakistani B-57 bombers bombed Cherata village. It is a suburb, Cherata or Cherata, how do you pronounce it? I don't know, but it's a suburb of Amritsar. And killing over 55 civilians and wounding many more. And it destroyed around 15 houses. So after the ceasefire, it's as per the Indian records, we captured around 1920 square kilometers of Pakistani territory. They captured around 540 square kilometers of our territory. We lost around less than 3,000 Indian soldiers, and Pakistan lost around 6,000 soldiers. This is Indian numbers. There are various other numbers quoted by Pakistani and other journals, but I took Indian numbers. Indian lost around 97 tanks, and Pakistan 450 around Pakistani tanks were destroyed, and we lost around 60 aircrafts, whereas Pakistani lost just 43 aircrafts. But this whole, even after the ceasefire, the story, I'm sorry, I'm just going a bit further because this is my last slide, and then we can wrap it up. The story then ended with the ceasefire agreement, as Pakistan continued to violate the ceasefire agreement and was launching both military and secret operations, clandestine operations to capture maximum Indian territory. So you can imagine in the Rajasthan sector itself, they occupied many Indian villages after the ceasefire. In the north as well, they were inside ceasefire line in Uri and Naushera sector, even after 24 September. Ceasefire happened on 23rd. So Pakistani permanent representative to the United Nations addressed that on 26 September said that military disengagement should proceed with an honorable political settlement. So it showed that they were in no mood to respect the ceasefire. So then the same dance of the devil happened in the United Nations. So United Nations Secretary General again reported violation of ceasefire by both India and Pakistan to Security Council. They again passed another resolution on 27 September, and again on 5th November 1965, re-expressing their grave concerns and asking to respect 20th September resolution. So they are passing resolution after resolution. But that did not have any impact on the Pakistan, who was visualizing ceasefire as an opportunity to grab Indian territory through all those clandestine military operations. They further accelerated. The guerrilla warfare was at its peak even after the ceasefire, and United Nations failed miserably in this whole episode and could not deter Pakistan to bring peace in the subcontinent. But when these ceasefire negotiations was happening during the mid of September, on September 98, so Soviet Union invited India and Pakistan to meet in Soviet Union for discussions. And again on November 21st, because of these all violations happening, Soviet Union renewed their offer and suggested for a meeting in Tashkent. Now, this move was also supported by United States, and both sides, India and Pakistan, accepted the invitation, uh, and they agreed to visit Tashkent. Fast forward 3 months from November, Tashkent Summit conference opened on 4th of January, 1966, between Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri ji and Ayub Khan. Soviet Prime Minister Kosygin initially wanted the two leaders to hold bilateral discussions. He did not want to interfere, but both sides adopted a very firm stance on their positions. India maintained its stance that nothing related to Kashmir can be discussed, and Ayub Khan said that we can sign a no-war agreement only after resolving the Kashmir issue. So it was a deadlock. So Kosygin, who was the Soviet prime minister, had to step in, and he used all his diplomatic skills under his command over a period of time to get these two leaders to agree for an implementation of a ceasefire proposal and arrive on a basis for further bilateral discussions for the various other issues that were involved. So ultimately, joint declaration, which is known as Tashkent Declaration, was signed on January 10th, 1966 at around about 4:30 p.m. IST, and a few hours later, after signing the declaration at about 1:30 a.m. in the morning of 11th January, Lal Bahadur Shastri ji died of heart attack in Tashkent itself. His death remains a mystery, and there are multiple theories around it. We can have another full session about his death and what happened after his death, but the official version is of a heart attack, so I'll stay there. In the slide I've captured the points, salient points of the Tashkent agreement. It was all the general points. All the forces have to go at before August 5th positions, and they have to return the property and assets taken by either side. So imagine all the advances that we made. We occupied 1900 square kilometers of territory, which we have to give it back to Pakistan. So it was a setback in itself, and all other all other features that I don't want to iterate here. So with that, the events of Indian-Pakistan War of 1965 came to a sordid conclusion, I would say. And with that, I rest my case. Thanks a lot for listening me. I know it must have been an ordeal with so much. It was a monologue. And please feel free to ask any questions. Gautam ji, Amit ji, over to you.
It was a brilliant session, Abhinavji. Literally, a deep research have shown in across all of your